The morning run from Cathora East Relay came in at 6:14, 4 minutes late, which meant Darrow had hit ice on the upper switchback again. I heard the truck before I saw it. That particular rattle in the third axle. The one I kept telling him to get checked. The one he kept ignoring. I put my second cup down, pulled on my jacket, went out to meet him. The sky was doing what it always did at this hour on Cathora, pouring light across the chalk flats like someone had tipped a bucket of it from the ridge. Amber going gold, going white at the horizon. The kind of light that makes a ruined landscape look like something worth staying in. I had stayed in it for 6 years. That was its own kind of answer about me. Darrow climbed down from the cab and handed me the run sheet without a word. He was a man of few words in the mornings. I respected that about him. We had a working arrangement. He brought the freight in. I signed for it. We exchanged perhaps 12 sentences. Then he drove back to the relay. It suited us both. 3 pallets of concentrate, he said. 1 sealed environment crate marked perishable. Usual dry goods. That was sentences 1 through 7. I looked at the run sheet. The sealed environment crate was listed as agricultural specimen transit. Normal enough. Cathora's growing season was coming. People shipped soil culture in sealed thermal units all the time. I initialed the sheet. Darrow unloaded the tailgate with a handcart and drove away before I had finished signing. I moved the dry goods inside first. Habit from the hauling days. Driest cargo in first. Heaviest last. Then I came back for the environment crate. Standard Federation gray composite. Knee-high. Clasped on 3 sides. The label said KO Agricultural Transit and had a vendor code I didn't recognize. Not unusual. What was unusual was the weight. Agricultural specimen transit crates run between 8 and 15 kilos, depending on the culture volume. This one was 24. I stood in the morning light and looked at it. 24 kilos. For a sealed agricultural specimen, that was either a very dense substrate or it was something else. 22 years of freight hauling teaches you to read the discrepancy before you open the lid, because what you find inside a wrongly weighted crate can go 3 ways. Harmless mistake, regulatory problem, or the kind of thing you don't want to have found without a witness. I had no witness. I opened it anyway. The girl was wedged in the lower left quadrant, behind a folded thermal blanket, knees drawn up, both hands pressed flat against her chest, the way a child holds herself when she has decided that being very small is the best available plan. Ice blue skin, silver eyes so large they took up most of the upper half of her face, pointed ears that twitched once when the lid came off and the light hit her. She looked at me and I looked at her, and neither of us moved for about 4 seconds. Then she sneezed. It was a very small sneeze, the kind that happens when cold air meets a nose that has been sealed in a crate for however long. She blinked at me afterward with the expression of a creature that has surprised itself. Right, I said. I had no better response than that. She didn't have a transit chip. I checked her wrists and the back of her neck. Nothing. No manifest entry. No registration tag. No documentation of any kind. She had a small gray travel sack tucked behind her in the crate. Inside a wool blanket, a heel of something that might have been bread, and a flat polished river stone. Pale, with a thin vein of white running through it like a seam. She clutched the stone in her left hand as I helped her out of the crate. She did not let go of it. I brought her inside. The sensible thing would have been to call the relay station immediately. I knew that. I had the relay frequency on my board. Darrow would still have been within range. I stood at the board for 30 seconds, finger over the transmit key. And then I looked at her sitting at my table with her feet dangling 6 centimeters above the floor, silver eyes tracking my every movement with the focused attention of a small creature that has just made a calculated decision to trust one person and is watching very carefully to see if it was a mistake. I took my finger off the transmit key, made breakfast instead. She ate carefully, not starved grabbing. Careful. The way children eat when they have learned not to assume there will be more. I put down a second portion without saying anything, just set it on the table, went back to the counter. She looked at the second portion, looked at me, looked at the second portion again. Something in her face rearranged itself in a way I couldn't name but understood. She ate the second portion, too. I gave her the name Sola while I worked out what to do with her, because I needed to call her something. It was a shortened version of a longer Velos Avon word that meant simply small one. Accurate enough description. She accepted it without apparent objection. She was by every measure I had about 6 or 7 years old. I didn't speculate beyond that. She had pointed ears and the Velocivan bilateral eye structure, the pale blue skin that deepened to a slight violet at the fingers and at the tips of her ears, and she moved with the deliberate quietness of a child who had spent time practicing not being noticed. I recognized that quality. I had practiced it myself at various points in my life, for different reasons. It was when I checked the travel sack more carefully that I found it, tucked under the wool blanket, flat against the bottom, a piece of paper. Velos Avon script handwritten, not printed. Handwritten, which meant someone had sat down and written it deliberately. And torn, not ripped carelessly, torn with precision, straight down the middle, the kind of tear you make when you intend to tear something. The top half was there. The bottom half was not. My translator rendered what remained. Find someone who reads carefully. Give them. That was where the paper ended. The sentence had been in the bottom half. I looked at the torn edge for a long time. Then I looked at Sola. She was watching me with the stone in one hand and an expression of careful neutrality that was... I was beginning to understand her face when she was paying very close attention. Someone had torn this paper before putting her in the crate, kept the bottom half, left the instruction without its object, which was either an accident or a message directed at whoever opened the crate. I put the paper down carefully, went back to the relay board. I had some vendor code research to do. The code traced back to a freight forwarding company on the Keth Varan Plateau relay, dissolved 3 months prior. Before it dissolved, it had been a subsidiary of a Velocivan secondary house commercial registry arm. The registry arm had a name, Vethran Commercial Transit. I wrote that down. I had heard of the Velocivan secondary houses. Not specifically House Vethran, but the general situation I knew. The compact assembly had been in the middle of a dissolution cycle for secondary houses for over a year. A ruling had voided several contested property and custody instruments. Children of dissolved secondary houses occupied a legal category that was in the assembly's terminology pending reclassification. Pending reclassification. I'd had cargo listed as pending reclassification once. A shipment of high-grade alloy components whose import classification was being contested by 3 different regulatory bodies. They'd sat in a bonded warehouse for 11 months. I thought about that. Then I thought about Sola sitting at my table turning the Riverstone over in her fingers. Then I thought I need to read the full freight code. I had not opened my operator's code file in 2 years. It was in the physical document cabinet, the full one, because paper was harder to intercept than digital. I pulled it out, set it on the desk, poured a 3rd cup of coffee, started reading. Sola migrated from the table to my workbench somewhere around page 12. She didn't ask, didn't announce. Just appeared there sitting cross-legged at the far end of the bench with the Riverstone in her lap, and her silver eyes moving between my face and the pages of the code file, with the focused attention of someone auditing a process they don't yet fully understand but intend to. I found this somehow not intrusive. I kept reading, page after page of freight operator regulations, certification requirements, liability provisions. The language of a profession I had practiced for 22 years and knew well enough to navigate in my sleep. And then page 47. Provision 7C, subclause 9. Any licensed freight operator who receives an unmanifested biological arrival and is unable to establish valid prior custodial authority may register a temporary freight custody dependent status under their own operator's bond, effective from time of discovery, provided the dependent is a sapient minor, and no valid competing custodial instrument has been filed within the operator's current jurisdiction. I read it once, then again, then a 3rd time more slowly, the way you read something when you need to make absolutely certain you are reading it correctly. Sapient minor. Not cargo, not specimen. Sapient minor. The custody status would be logged in the Federation Freight Registry under the operator's bond number and would hold pending a formal compact review, minimum 30 days, maximum 90, during which no competing warrant could compel removal without the review board's authorization. 30 days. I sat with that for a moment. 30 days was not a solution. 30 days was a door. And doors, in my experience, were what you used when you didn't yet know what was behind them, but you knew with absolute certainty that standing in the hallway was not an option. I pulled out my operator's bond certificate from the physical document file. My handwriting was steady. It had always been steady. I wrote Sola's description into the freight custody dependent field. Timestamp. Date. Bond number. Unmanifested biological arrival. No prior custodial authority established. Custody assumed under provision 7C subclause 9. Time of discovery, 6:31 hours. Kethera West Post Operator Mace Varn. I initialed it at the bottom with the same initials I had put on every cargo run sheet for 22 years. Then I transmitted a copy to the Federation Freight Registry, a copy to the Compact Secondary Records Office, a copy to the Cathora Plateau Administrative Relay, filed the transmission logs, stamped the physical document with the way station's administrative seal, put it in the outgoing physical mail satchel for Darrow's next run. When I turned around, Sola was standing beside my chair. She had come over silently, just appeared at my elbow. She looked at the document on my desk, at the stamps, at the transmission log, silver eyes moving over every line. "It's paperwork," I said. "It means you're listed under my bond. No one can move you without going through a review board." Sola looked at the document for another moment. Then she took the Riverstone out of her pocket and set it on top of the document. A precise, deliberate click. She looked at me again. Then she went back to the workbench, took the small wool blanket from her sack, folded it into a neat square in the corner and sat down on it. I sat with the stone on top of my paperwork. Did not say anything, because there wasn't anything to say. That was day 1. Day 2 was research. I spent the morning on the relay channel running the vendor code trace deeper. The Vethran Commercial Transit subsidiary had registered at the same address as a Vethran secondary house commercial arm that had been active until 14 months ago when the dissolution cycle began. The dissolution ruling had voided custody instruments across several secondary houses. House Vethran was on the list. So was another house. The name of that second house had been partially redacted in the public registry standard procedure during active bureau review, but the record number matched the house name embedded in the vendor code. K.O. Keth Izora. I noted that down without knowing yet what it meant. Sola sat at the workbench and watched me work. She had found the box of outdated cartography cards I kept in the back of the supply shelf. Maps of the Cathora Plateau and the surrounding corridors left by a prior way station operator. She sorted them without being asked, cross-referenced them against the relay map on my board. Did this silently and systematically the way someone does a task they have given themselves because they need to have something to do with their hands. I understood that need. By midday, Sola had sorted all 47 cards and set 2 aside. I looked up. "What's wrong with those 2? She pointed to a corridor marking on the first card, then pointed to the relay board map. The marking was off, by roughly 3 degrees and a half-kilometer shift. I checked it against the Federation Survey Registry. The card was wrong. I filed a correction notice to the survey office. "That's useful work," I said. "Spotting errors in the survey data." She considered this. "Is that a job? Finding errors?" "Survey verification. Yes." She looked back at the cards and made a small, satisfied sound. I went back to the vendor code trace. That evening I stood at the window for a while. The chalk flat had gone gray-white in the late light, cold coming in off the ridge. I could see the eastern road from here. The single road in and out, running straight as a scar across the pale ground until it bent around the far ridge and disappeared. I was thinking about Kiva. I did that less than I used to. 6 years had given me that much. The thinking about Kiva happened less often and felt different when it did. Less like a wound. More like pressing on a place that had healed wrong. Kiva had been a freight hauler too. Better at the long corridor runs. Worse, at the plateau routes where the weather turned without warning. She had also been the one who read footnotes first. That was a specific thing I remembered. Specific and clear. On a long outer reach run years ago, Kiva had been working through a cargo manifest that didn't line up with the physical count. Everyone else on the crew had been looking at the main document. Kiva had found the footnote, the one that explained the discrepancy, the one that saved us 3 days in a quarantine hold. The footnote is where they put the things they don't want you to find, Kiva had said, which is exactly why you read the footnote first. I had kept the habit after she died, because it was hers, and because keeping the habits of people you've lost is a way of continuing to be in conversation with them. And I had needed to continue being in conversation. Kiva had died in a pressure failure 6 years ago. On a run I hadn't been on because I'd taken the Cathora posting while she went ahead. The kind of thing that has no malice in it, no lesson, just physics and bad timing. I had stopped hauling after that and come to the way station and built a life that was small enough to lose nothing else from. Now I stood at the window thinking about Kiva and thinking about the torn paper and thinking about the vendor code and the name Keth Isora, and I thought I am 54 years old, and I have been a freight hauler for 22 years, and I have learned to read discrepancies. This entire situation is a discrepancy. Read it. Day 3 came in cold. I was on my second cup when the Federation gray ground transport came over the ridge. 4 officers in standard formation. I'd been expecting this, had known since the moment I filed the custody hold that this was coming. I put my cup down, picked up my operator's license and the filing receipt. I went out to meet them at the depot gate. The lead was a woman, perhaps 46. Velasivan by the height and the pale amber eyes. Dark hair cut short and practical. The flat professional calm of someone who has done this work for a long time and does not enjoy it but also does not flinch from it. Operator Varn, she said. Warrant officer, I said. Isolde Favre, Bureau of Compact Resettlement. She had done her research. Behind Favre stood 3 officers at appropriate spacing. 2 I registered as standard bureau. The third, taller, standing slightly apart, I noticed in a different way. His eyes were moving. Not over me. Over the depot. The window. The supply room door visible through the glass. Not checking for threats. Looking for something specific. I noted that, filed it, said nothing. We have a bureau recovery warrant for a Velasivan miner, Favre said. Secondary house dissolved, status pending reassignment. Our records indicate a crate containing the miner was delivered to this station on the morning of the 14th. That's correct, I said. Then you'll understand we need to take custody of the miner and transport her to the Bureau Processing Center at Cathvarin for assignment. I understand that's what your warrant says, I said. I handed her the filing receipt. I filed a freight custody dependent registration under Provision 7C, Subclause 9, at 0740 on the 14th, 1 hour and 9 minutes after time of discovery. The filing is logged in the Federation Freight Registry and copied to the Compact Secondary Records Office. Under the provision, no competing warrant can compel removal without a Compact Review Board authorization. The minimum review period is 30 days. Favre took the receipt. She read it properly. Not the way people read things to appear to have read them. Actually reading, line by line. The third officer shifted his weight slightly. I noticed that too. This provision applies to freight transit cargo, Favre said, not to persons. Subclause 9 specifies sapient miners, I said, which is a person classification. The Federation Freight Registry accepted the filing without objection. The Bureau's position will be that a freight operator's bond cannot establish custodial priority over a Bureau dissolution warrant. That may well be the Bureau's position, I said. The review board will establish whether that position holds. In the meantime, the provision is on the books. The filing is registered. I'm not in a position to release custody without the authorization. Favre held the receipt for another moment. The silence between us was professional, entirely without hostility. She was doing her job. I was doing mine. I'll need to make some calls, Favre said. There's a relay frequency on the board inside, I said. I'll make tea. I made tea. Favre made her calls. The two standard officers stood outside in the amber morning light and said nothing. The third officer had positioned himself at the east corner of the depot. Not standard placement. That was where you stood if you wanted a sight line to the building's secondary access. I carried a second cup out to Favre and didn't look at the third officer. Inside through the window I could see Sola at the workbench, still working on the cartography cards. Head down, precise. The river stone beside her on the bench. Favre finished her calls. We went through it again. The provision, the subclause, the timeline. Favre raised 3 procedural questions. I answered each one. She was precise, methodical, and entirely fair. She wasn't trying to win by intimidation. She was trying to establish whether my filing was valid. That was what good regulatory work looked like. The Bureau will file a challenge to the provision's applicability with the Regional Federation Freight Authority, Favre said finally. That's the Bureau's right, I said. The challenge will go to the regional authority first. If it proceeds, it will go to the review board. That process takes time. The 30-day minimum holds until the challenge is resolved. Yes. A pause. Operator Varn. Favre set down her cup. I want to be direct with you. Please. The Bureau's position is not that this child should be harmed. The Bureau's position is that under the dissolution ruling, proper custodial assignment through the Bureau's process is in the minor's best interests. I looked at her. I understand that's the Bureau's position, I said. My position is that a child who was put in a freight crate by someone trying to get her somewhere the Bureau couldn't follow is a child whose interests are probably not served by Bureau assignment. My position is that I filed a custody hold under a valid provision. The filing stands. The review board will decide the case. Until they do, she stays here. Favre nodded. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. The challenge filing will come through within 48 hours, she said. I'll be ready for it. Favre stood. At the door she paused. Considered something. Did not say it. Went out. I watched the 4 officers get back into the ground transport. The third officer, last to get in, glanced back at the depot window at the angle of the supply room. I noted the direction, the angle, the duration. Then I went inside. That night, late after Sola had gone to sleep in the supply room, the relay board pinged. Not a scheduled transmission, not a Bureau channel. A short encrypted signal routed through a secondary corridor code that belonged to the same address cluster as Vethrin Commercial Transit. I opened it. 3 words in Velosavan. My translator rendered them. Give her back. I sat at the board in the dark. The chalk flat was pale white through the window. The eastern road running straight to the ridge. No sound. No lights. I looked at the supply room door. Behind it, Sola was sleeping the deep, quiet sleep of a child who had, after a very long time of not being anywhere safe, decided that this particular floor was safe enough. I looked at the 3 words on my screen. Not Bureau. Bureau didn't communicate through encrypted secondary corridor codes routed through dissolved freight subsidiaries. This was House Vethrin. And House Vethrin knew Sola was here, which meant they had been tracking her through the channel, which meant the torn paper, the dissolved subsidiary, the vendor code that traced back to Vethrin. None of that was accident. Someone had put Sola in the channel. Someone else had been following her through it. I deleted the message from the visible log, copied it to an encrypted backup file on physical storage only, printed the timestamp and transmission header on paper, added it to the physical document satchel, went to the window and looked at the eastern road for a long time. I was a freight hauler. I had spent 22 years moving things from one place to another, reading manifests, checking weights, noting discrepancies. What I knew right now, a child had come in on a wrongly weighted crate. The child had a torn paper that ended mid-sentence. The child had a river stone she did not put down. Someone had been following her through the freight channel, and Favre's third officer had been looking at the supply room window. Read the discrepancy before you open the lid. I went to the code file. I had a feeling I was going to need page 47 again, and this time I was going to read the footnotes. On the morning of day 4, Sola had migrated from the supply room floor to the cot I had left out sometime in the night. I noticed this when I came in to check on her. The cot was in the same corner, same wool blanket neatly arranged, Riverstone on the floor beside it within reach. She was sitting up fully awake, watching me with the patient silver eyes. "Tea," I said. She slid off the cot and followed me to the kitchen. We sat on opposite sides of the table. The code file opened between us at page 47. The challenge filing from Favre arrived at 0900. Formal header. 3 legal arguments numbered and labeled. Favre's name at the bottom. I read it all. Twice. The first argument, provision 7C, had been written for freight cargo, not persons, and its extension to sapient biologicals required explicit assembly authorization that had not been obtained. The second argument, the filing timeline, was irregular as the custody registration had been made without first attempting to locate existing custodial authority. The third argument, the way station's administrative jurisdiction was insufficient to anchor a custody hold of this nature. Arguments 2 and 3 I could answer tonight. Argument 1 was the problem, because argument 1 was not wrong. Not entirely. If a review board decided that extension to persons required explicit authorization, the hold collapsed. I needed something that said the provision was always meant to cover persons. I went back to page 47, read it again. Then I looked at the bottom of the page. Footnote 12. Referenced session record 7C14 of the Federation Freight Assembly. 31 years ago, I had read the provision 3 times. I had not read the footnote. I queried the assembly archive. Session record 7C14 took 40 minutes to retrieve. It was 43 pages of committee proceedings. I started reading. Sola appeared at my elbow. She had been at the workbench. Now she stood beside my chair and looked at the code file. "The Bureau says the provision doesn't apply to people," I said, not explaining, thinking out loud, because thinking out loud helped, and there was no one else to think at. "That it's for cargo. The challenge will probably succeed unless I find something that says it was always intended to cover persons." Sola was quiet. Then she pointed at the code file. I looked at her. "I've read it 3 times. She pointed again. At page 47. Then moved her finger down. To the bottom of the page. To footnote 12. I looked at footnote 12. Then at the archive document already open on my screen. I found my place. Kept reading. Page 22, 26, 29, page 31. The committee chair's closing remarks on the subclause 9 language. The language of sapient minor was chosen deliberately and in preference to the language of cargo to ensure the provision's applicability to the full range of unmanifested biological arrivals, including persons, as the committee determined that the humanitarian purpose of the provision required explicit breadth of coverage, including persons. Chosen deliberately. I read it 3 times. Then I looked at Sola. She was watching me with the patient silver eyes. "How did you know to look at the footnote?" I said. It wasn't quite a question. She looked at the code file, then at me. The look said plainly because that is where the information was, and the information was what you needed. 6 years old, possibly 7. She had been watching me work for 4 days, and she had understood more of it than I had given her credit for. I filed the counter-argument that night. Session record language quoted in full. Transmitted to the Regional Freight Authority, Compact Secondary Records Office, Review Board Pre-Registration Queue, stamped the physical copies, put them in the mail satchel. Then I sat back in my chair and thought Kiva would have found that footnote on day 1. But she did. Day 5. I was on the relay channel running a deeper trace on the Veteran subsidiary records when the board returned a secondary result I hadn't queried for. A transmission log. Old. From the dissolved Veteran Commercial Transit address, sent 8 days ago, to 3 recipients, 2 freight operators at relay stations along the Cathora corridor, stations that would have been on Sola's routing path before she reached Cathora West, and Mace Varn, Cathora West Post. The timestamp was 4 days before Sola's crate had arrived. I sat with that. 4 days before. Which meant Vethrin had known the routing, had known the destination, had known Sola was coming here before she arrived. She was not a random stop. She was the endpoint. I filed the transmission header, added it to the physical document satchel, made a note in the encrypted backup. Then I looked across the room at Sola, who was standing at the east-facing window with the river stone in both hands, looking out at the chalk flat. Sola. She turned. Come look at something. She came over. I pointed to the east corridor on the relay map, the standard route from the main plateau hub to Kethera West. Then I pointed to the 3 stations marked along it. Did you stop at stations before here? A pause. Very slight. Yes. How many? 3. Were you inside the crate the whole time? Yes. I nodded. Did not ask anything else. Went back to the relay board. Sola went back to the window. Day 6 arrived with frost on the chalk flat and a new cartographic error. Sola put it on my desk at 0730 without comment. A current survey plate corridor 7 with a marking deviation at the eastern junction. Not a large error, but consistent with a pattern she had been tracking across 4 plates now. A systematic offset in the eastern corridor markers that suggested the original survey equipment had been miscalibrated. I checked it, filed it, flagged the pattern to the survey office as a potential systemic issue requiring full corridor review. That's 3 corrections in 6 days, I said. Sola made the small, satisfied sound. Do survey verifiers get to travel? She asked. To do field verification, yes. To different corridors. All the corridors. She absorbed that, turned back to the plates. And I thought, she is 6 years old, and she is planning her career, and I am watching it happen in real time, so I didn't disrupt it. Day 8. Darrow's morning run. He came in on time, handed me the run sheet, started unloading. Then before he got back in the cab, he stopped. That was unusual. Darrow did not stop. Darrow completed tasks and departed. He stood beside the cab for a moment, not looking at me, looking east. There's been a vehicle, he said. East side. Point on the road before the ridge. 2 days now. Not a freight rig. He looked at me then. Brief, direct. Not Bureau either, he said. Bureau uses standard gray. This one's a private configuration. He got in his truck, drove away. I stood in the morning light and looked east for a long time. Whatever was parked at that point on the road had a sight line to the depot. I went inside, pulled up the Bureau's public officer registry, searched for the 3rd officer, Torvin Alsh, Compact Bureau of Resettlement, assigned to the Kethera Plateau District, under Warrant Officer Favre's unit, assigned to Favre's unit, except Darrow had just told me the vehicle wasn't Bureau configuration. So either Torvin was off duty, or he wasn't acting as Bureau anymore. Day 9. Favre filed a secondary challenge. The argument the 31-year-old session record constituted legislative history, not statutory text. Legislative history carried only persuasive authority, not binding authority. Without explicit statutory incorporation, the session record language could not compel the interpretation I was claiming. It was a good argument. I spent most of the day reading every amendment to Provision 7C filed since the original drafting, 14 amendments over 31 years. None had incorporated the session record language into the statute itself, because why would they? At the time of each amendment, the provision's application to persons had not been formally contested. There was no need to codify what no one had challenged. Until now, I needed a case, a precedent, a review board ruling that had already decided this question and decided it correctly. I started searching. Sola was at the workbench. The systematic offset in the eastern corridor markers had expanded. She was now cross-referencing 3 corridors worth of survey data against historical relay records to determine when the miscalibration had begun. Methodical, patient, 6 years old. I looked at her for a moment and then went back to the case search. Day 10. I found it at 2:17 in the afternoon. Compact Review Board. 12 years ago. A freight operator on the outer reach corridor. Unmanifested Velocivan child. Bureau challenge on identical grounds. 7C was cargo provision. Legislative history not binding. Custodial priority contested. Review board ruling freight operators custody hold valid. Session record language dispositive of legislative intent. Subclause 9 applies to persons by design. Never overturned. Binding precedent. I sat back in my chair. Breathed. Filed it before I did anything else. Regional Freight Authority. Compact Secondary Records Office. Review Board Pre-Registration Queue. Stamped. Mailed. Digital and physical both. Then I printed an additional copy and addressed it to Warrant Officer Isolde Favre at the Bureau District Office. Professional courtesy. Favre had been thorough and fair. She deserved to know before the official filing reached her. Sola looked up from the survey plates. Did you find it? I found it. She looked at me the way she looked at things she was categorizing. Then she turned back to the plates and made the small, satisfied sound. I put the filing receipts in order. Then I thought about page 31 of a 43-page archive document that a 6-year-old had led me to by pointing at a footnote. Keva, I thought. You found it faster. But I got there. Day 11. Favre came without her officers. Alone. Her own vehicle. She parked at the depot gate and walked in. No warrant documentation. No official posture. Just Favre in her bureau jacket, hands at her sides. I met her at the door. The Howland precedent, Favre said. Yes. I'm familiar with it. She sat down at the table. I poured tea. Favre wrapped both hands around the cup. Operator Varn. She looked up. I want to ask you something directly. All right. What is your position? Not the legal position. Yours. I looked at her. She was asking honestly. That deserved an honest answer. My position, I said, is that a child who was put in a freight crate by someone trying to get her somewhere the Bureau couldn't follow is a child whose interests are probably not served by Bureau assignment. A pause. My position is also that I filed under a valid provision that now has binding precedent behind it. Until the review board decides otherwise, she stays here. Favre nodded, slow. I want to be direct about something else, Favre said. Her hands moved on the cup. Slight. Officer Alsh has filed a separate warrant. Silence. Not through my office, she said. Through regional authority directly. I was not informed until it appeared in the system. I kept my face still. The warrant requests transfer of the minor to a custodial representative of House Vethrine, Favre said. Under a prior commercial custodial agreement, it describes the minor as a commercial asset. The phrase landed in the room like something physical. Commercial asset. I said nothing. Favre stood, walked to the window, looked out at the chalk flat. Then she set a folded paper on the table. I'm going to step outside, she said. I'll be back in 5 minutes. She went out. I unfolded the paper. Internal Bureau document. Torvin Alsh's warrant request full text. The commercial custodial agreement claim. The asset classification. And at the bottom a contact reference for the Vethrine legal representative who had initiated the request. Same address cluster as Vethrine Commercial Transit. Same origin as the encrypted message on day 3. Give her back. I folded the paper, placed it flat on the table, looked across the room at the supply room door. Sola was in there, resting after the morning's survey work. Not cargo, not asset, not pending reclassification. A child who had sat at 3 stations with a stone in her hand. I thought someone inside the Bureau is working for Vethrine. And then Favre knows. And then Favre just left a document on my table and went outside. I added it to the physical file. When Favre came back in, we didn't speak about the paper. I poured a second cup. We sat for a moment. The Howland precedent is binding, Favre said. Yes. The Bureau will need to address Officer Alsh's warrant through internal review. I'd expect so. A pause. Is the minor all right? Favre said. She corrected 3 survey errors this week, I said. She's planning her career. Something moved in Favr's expression, very brief. Good, she said. She left. Day 12. Day 13. The days had a shape now. Morning relay channel run sheets. Freight correspondence. Sola at the workbench, or at my side, watching the board work with the focused attention she gave everything. Asking questions afterward. Precise questions. Why does that filing go to the records office and not the regional authority? Different jurisdictions. Records office logs it. Regional authority acts on it. What does cross-registration mean? Filing the same document in 2 systems so neither one can claim they didn't receive it. Why do you stamp the physical copy when you've already transmitted the digital one? Digital can be amended, I said. Physical mail has a postmark, a physical receipt chain, harder to quietly revise. She absorbed that. So, the stamp is a record of the record. Exactly. She went back to the survey plates. I watched her for a moment. This small ice blue person who had been in a freight crate 14 days ago and was now auditing 3 corridors worth of survey data while simultaneously learning the principles of documentation law. I thought about the torn paper. Find someone who reads carefully. Give them what? The stone was on the desk in front of her. It had migrated there from the supply room corner from my document pile from her pocket. It lived now on whatever surface she happened to be working at. I had stopped thinking of it as her stone. I had started thinking of it as the stone, which was different, which I did not examine too closely. Day 14. Darrow came in. Not freight early, personal early. He pulled up in his own vehicle, which I had never seen him do. He got out, stood by the hood, hat in his hands. That vehicle's gone, he said. When? This morning, before sunrise. I looked at him. There's something on your door, he said. I went around to the east-facing side of the depot building, on the wooden door frame. Low. Careful. Carved with something sharp and precise, small enough that you'd miss it if you weren't looking. The symbol of House Vethrin. Not scratched. Carved. With patience. With intention. I looked at it for a long time. Then I photographed it. Time-stamped. Filed it. Added it to the physical satchel. Darrow was still standing by his vehicle when I came back. Not speaking. Just there in the way that certain people are there when they want you to know you're not alone without making a production of it. Thank you, I said. He nodded, got in his vehicle, left. I stood at the window and looked at the eastern road. Someone had been standing close enough to carve that symbol. Close enough to have done something else if they'd wanted. They hadn't. Which was a message. We were here. We can come back. Day 15. Day 16. I did not sleep well. Not because I was afraid. I had decided early that fear was not a useful response and had set it aside. But I lay awake and thought. I thought about the warrant Torvin had filed. Commercial asset, the language of it, the choice of that language. Not contested custodial claim, not disputed house assignment. Commercial asset. There was a compact assembly foundational charter, Article 3, Section 1. I had read it during my original research and had not thought to cite it, because I had been working in freight law, and the charter was not freight law. But Article 3, Section 1 said, no sapient minor born of biological origin may be classified as property or commercial instrument under any instrument of law within this compact, regardless of prior contractual obligations between parties. Regardless of prior contractual obligations. Any commercial custodial agreement Vethrin claimed would be null, not disputed, null, by foundational charter. I got up at 3 a.m. and pulled up the charter. Found the article. Read it 4 times. Drafted the filing at 4 a.m. Refined it at 5. Transmitted it to the review board at 6:15 before Darrow's run came in. Flagged it as foundational charter challenge to the Vethrin warrant. Attached Torvin's filing and the commercial asset language as Exhibit A. Then I put the kettle on. Day 17, 18. Sola asked about Kiva, not directly. Sola rarely asked anything directly. But we were sitting at the table after the morning run, and I had laughed at something in the relay correspondence, and she had looked at me with the evaluating look and said, "You don't laugh much." "I laugh," I said. "Not very much." I considered denying this, decided it wasn't worth it. "No, not very much lately." "Before," Sola said, using the word she used for the period before the crate. "Before." I agreed. She turned the river stone in her fingers, running her thumb along the pale vein. "What was before?" "A different life," I said. "Freight runs, long ones, outer reach corridor, places I haven't been in 6 years. With someone." Not a question. An observation. "Kiva," I said. Sola absorbed the name, filed it, did not press. "Was Kiva careful?" she said after a moment. I looked at the chalk flat through the window. "Very," I said. Sola put the stone down on the table between us. Left it there. Went back to the survey plates. I looked at the stone for a while. Day 19. The review board acknowledged receipt of the foundational charter filing. Torvin Alsh's warrant had been placed under administrative review pending investigation of the commercial classification claim, which meant it was suspended, which meant Vethrin's legal avenue through Torvin was closed at least temporarily. I sent a copy of the acknowledgement to Favre. Favre responded within the hour. One-line filing noted, "Thank you for the courtesy copy." Day 20. Evening. I had been at the board since after the morning run, the kind of work that had a rhythm to it once you found the rhythm. I had found it around day 8. Now it was almost automatic. Sola came and stood beside my chair. She did this often. Just appeared, stood, did not ask for anything. Except tonight. I felt it before I registered it, the slight change in weight beside me, the small hands around my waist, Sola's face pressed against my ribs. Not asking, not performing. Just there. The way you hold someone when you know what they've done, and you have no adequate language for it, and so you use your arms instead. I stood with my arms at my sides. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then I put one hand on the back of her head, carefully. The way you put your hand on something small that you have not touched before and are aware could break. She did not break. We stood like that for a while. I became aware at some point that I was crying. Not much. Not the kind that requires anything from anyone. Just the quiet kind that happens when something that has been held at a careful distance for a very long time finally reaches you despite your best efforts. I didn't do anything about it. Sola didn't do anything about it. Just stayed. Face against my ribs, arms around my waist, holding on. I thought about Kiva, who read the footnotes first, who found things before they needed to be found, who had died in a pressure failure on a route I hadn't been on, and left behind a habit and a silence that had lasted 6 years. A child had found me by a footnote. Kiva's footnote. I stood there with my hand on the back of her head and thought about that for a long time. Day 21. Morning. I went out to check the east-facing door. The chalk flat empty in the early light. Just the eastern road and the ridge and the pale sky above it. Then I saw it, on the supply room door. The door that faced the chalk flat directly. The door Sola sometimes opened in the evenings to look at the sky. Another carving. Same symbol. Lower. Deliberate. They had come to the other side of the building this time, closer to the supply room. I photographed it, time-stamped it, went inside. I stood at the board and thought. Not the legal question, I had the legal question handled, but the physical question. Torvin was suspended from bureau duty, which meant if he was still coming here, he was coming on Vethrin's authority alone, with no bureau cover, which made him more dangerous, not less, because official actors follow rules. Unofficial actors choose their own. I thought about Sola asleep in the supply room. I thought I need this to resolve before the 30 days are up. I thought about the registry trace, House Isora, the name I had been setting aside. If Sola was from House Isora, if House Isora was the house in the dissolution cycle on the other side from Vethrin, Then someone in House Isora had put Sola in the freight channel to get her away from Vethrin, which meant someone in House Isora was looking for her, which meant if I could make enough noise in the official record, whoever was looking might find the noise. I had already been making that noise for 21 days. I thought maybe it's already been heard. I went back to the board, kept working. Day 22. I filed the foundational charter response at 06:15, before the kettle finished, before Sola came out of the supply room, before the chalk flat had fully shifted from gray to white. I had been awake since 4. Lying in the dark after coming back inside from photographing the carving, going over every argument I had, every document I'd filed, every transmission in the log. By 3 a.m. I had stopped trying to sleep and started drafting. What I was filing today was not a freight provision argument, not a legislative history dispute. This was Article 3, Section 1 of the Compact Assembly Foundational Charter, the document that preceded every bureau warrant, every House dissolution ruling, every commercial custodial agreement ever drafted in this system. And Vethrin had called Sola a commercial asset, which meant they had made a mistake. The kind you make when you are moving fast and you are confident, and you do not expect the person on the other end to read that carefully. I had read that carefully. I transmitted the filing to the review board, to the Compact Secondary Records Office, to the Regional Freight Authority, to the Assembly's own Legal Review Office, stamped, mailed, logged. Then I made coffee and waited for Darrow's run. Sola came out at 700. She looked at me, looked at the transmission log on the board, looked back at me. You filed something. 4 things. What was the new one? I told her. Article 3. Commercial asset classification null by foundational charter. Vethrin's entire legal claim predicated on a classification that did not legally exist. Sola was quiet for a moment. So they were wrong from the beginning. About that part, yes. Did they know they were wrong? I thought about that. I think they assumed no one would look that far back. She picked up the river stone, turned it once in her fingers, put it down. That was a mistake, she said. Yes, I said. It was. She went to the workbench, and somewhere in the back of my mind a voice said, 22 years of freight work, and I have never once had a colleague who understood the filing logic this fast. I thought Kava might have found it funny. Day 23. The review board's response came at noon. Torvin Ulsh's separate warrant suspended pending internal investigation. Commercial asset classification flagged for foundational charter review. No removal action to be taken during review period. 1 line at the bottom. Additional correspondence regarding this case expected within 72 hours. I read that last line 3 times. 72 hours from now was day 26. The review board didn't flag a timeline like that unless there was an incoming party. Not Bureau, not Vethrin, someone else. I filed the acknowledgement, made a note of the timeline. Sola was watching me. Something's coming, I said. What kind of something? I don't know yet. She nodded, like that was an acceptable answer. Like uncertainty named clearly was more useful than false reassurance. Which it was. She went back to the survey plates. Day 24. Favre came, alone. She sat down before I offered her a chair and put both hands flat on the table. The internal review on Alsh, she said. It has expanded. A pause. There are communications between Alsh and Vethrin's legal representative going back 11 months. Before this case. Before your filing. Before the crate arrived. I waited. He was not acting on Bureau authority, Favre said. He was using Bureau access to facilitate Vethrin's interests, including monitoring the freight channel for the miner's location. So, Torvin had not been following Sola because the Bureau told him to. He had been following Sola because Vethrin was paying him to, and he had used his Bureau credentials to do it. Every time he had stood at the east corner of my depot, every time his sightline had gone to the supply room window, every time the private vehicle had appeared on the ridge road. That had not been Bureau procedure. That had been Vethrin using a Bureau officer like a private contractor. He'll be removed from service, Favre said. And the veteran warrant. The commercial asset claim is being reviewed at assembly level, given the foundational charter filing. A pause. Your filing? Something moved in her expression. I want to tell you, that was well done. I looked at her. I had a good teacher, I said. Favre didn't ask who. She stood to leave. At the door she paused, turned back. There is going to be an incoming transmission tomorrow, she said, through official Federation transit channels, not Bureau. I am not authorized to tell you more than that. She held my eyes. I wanted you to be prepared. She left. Not Bureau. Official Federation transit. I thought about the registry trace. House Isora. The noise I had been making in the official record for 23 days. Maybe it had been heard. I went to the supply room door, knocked. Sola opened it immediately. Someone's coming tomorrow, I said. Through official Federation transit channels. She looked at me. The silver eyes did the quiet, focusing thing they did when she was deciding whether to name something. I waited. My mother, Sola said. Day 25. The evening before. I did not sleep. Not from dread. From the feeling of standing at the edge of a thing that was about to resolve. Like the moment before a manifest discrepancy becomes clear. I sat at the desk after midnight, the code file open. Not because I needed to read it. Because it was the thing I had been holding on to for 22 days, and holding it felt right. Sola came out of the supply room at 1 a.m. She didn't say anything, just came and sat in the other chair at the desk, Riverstone in both hands, turning it slowly, the pale vein catching the lamplight. We sat like that for a while. Are you afraid? I asked. She thought about it. No. What are you? Ready, she said. I looked at her. 6 years old, possibly 7. Sitting in a freight depot at 1 a.m. with a stone in her hands and a certainty in her face that I had not possessed at any age I could remember. Can I ask you something? I said. Yes. The stone. What does it mean? Exactly. You told me your mother said to find someone careful and give them the stone, but what does it mean when you give it? She looked at the stone for a moment. It means I know where you are, even if I am far. She ran her thumb along the pale vein. My mother said it to me. Her mother said it to her. A pause. When you give the stone to someone you mean to hold to, it means you are telling them I have found you, and I am not letting go. I looked at the stone, then at her. You gave it to me on day 1, I said. Yes. Before you knew anything about me. She looked at me with the patient silver eyes. I knew you read carefully, she said. I watched you look at the weight on the crate before you opened it. I heard you thinking before you called the relay. I saw how you put the second breakfast down without saying anything. She paused. I knew enough. I sat with that, a child in a freight crate, watching, reading me the way I had been reading manifests and provisions and committee session records. You waited at 3 stations before this one, I said. Yes. With the stone. Yes. And you didn't give it. No. Why not? She considered. The first operator talked too fast. He didn't read the weight, he just signed. A pause. The second operator read the weight, but she called her supervisor before she thought about it. Another pause. The third one read everything carefully, but when he found the discrepancy, he looked around first, to make sure no one was watching. I understood. He had been looking for whether it was safe for him, not for whoever was in the crate. And here, I said. You stood in the light and looked at the crate for a long time, she said. And then you opened it anyway, even without a witness, because it was the right thing, not because it was safe. I did not say anything, because there was nothing to say to that. We sat at the desk in the lamplight until nearly 3 a.m. Then she went back to the supply room, and I stayed at the desk, and thought whatever comes tomorrow, whatever the navigator sovereign decides, whatever the review board rules. I read the footnote. I opened the crate. I am not putting this down. Day 26. 600. Chalk flat gray in the early light. I was on my second cup when the relay board pinged. Not a standard channel ping. Official Federation transit frequency. The kind that came through the plateau hub, not the local board. I opened it. Formal Velos Aven. My translator rendered it in real time. Federation Transit Authority, Cathora West Post. This is Navigator Sovereign Vale Isora of First House Isora, requesting transit clearance and docking authorization. 4 ships. East approach. Please confirm reception. I looked at the board. 4 ships. I looked across the room. Sola had come out of the supply room. She was standing very still in the doorway, both hands around the river stone, silver eyes wide. She had heard the formal Velos Avan. She knew that voice. My mother, Sola said. I granted the clearance. I went outside. The 4 ships came over the eastern ridge at 1100. In the late morning light, the sky had gone from amber to gold to white. The chalk flat below it pale and still. They came in formation. Deliberate, organized, 2 flanking, 1 at the rear, 1 central, larger than the others, deep blue with markings in pale silver. First House Isora livery, a long way from subtle, a long way from anything that needed to be subtle. They settled on the chalk flat east of the depot, long shadows from their hulls spreading across the white ground in parallel lines. I stood at the depot gate, operator's license in my jacket pocket, filing receipts, the full physical document record, 4 kilograms of everything I had done for 26 days. The ramp of the central ship came down, 4 officers first, moving into formal arrangement, then a pause, the kind of pause that is not empty but weighted, and then Navigator Sovereign Vale Isora, tall, half a head taller than me, ice blue skin the color of very old ice, deep and dark in a way that Sola's was not yet. Silver white hair worn back and braided. Silver eyes. The same eyes as her daughter. Larger. Older. Having seen considerably more. She moved across the chalk flat with the kind of deliberate calm that takes decades to build, not hurrying, not needing to hurry. I held my ground at the gate. She stopped 3 feet away. She looked at me for a long moment. Operator Varn, she said. Her Federation standard was precise, without accent. Navigator Sovereign, I said. I have read your filings. A pause. All of them. The initial registration, the counter-argument, the Hallen precedent, the foundational charter challenge, the subsequent correspondence with the Bureau. Then you know where we stand. I know where you stand. Her eyes held mine. You stand on solid ground. Another pause. I want to understand why. Not an accusation, a genuine question. The kind that has waited 26 days to be asked and expects a real answer. I thought about what I had said to Favre, the official answer, and I thought about what I had not said to Favre, the longer answer, the one that started on a morning when a crate came in 4 minutes late. She sneezed, I said. Vale Isora waited. First morning, when I opened the crate, she sneezed, and she had this expression. I paused. The expression of a small creature that has surprised itself. And she had a stone in her hand. And I had the code file. So I read the code file. The Navigator Sovereign was quiet for a moment. That is a complete answer, she said. And then Sola was there. I had not heard the depot door, but she was standing beside me at the gate, river stone in both hands, silver eyes fixed on her mother. Vale Isora looked at her daughter. For a long moment she simply looked, and the thing that had been held in formal composure carefully, deliberately for 26 days of navigating back from wherever she had been. 26 days of not knowing, of knowing only that Sola was in a freight depot on a chalk flat, and that a freight operator named Mace Varn had filed a custody hold and was apparently not letting go. That thing opened, not broke. Opened, like a window. Sola went through the gate. No announcement, no ceremony. She crossed the space between them and put both arms around her mother's waist. The same complete, unhesitating hug that had no ask in it, no performance. Just, I know what you have been, and I am putting my arms around it. Sora's arms came down around her daughter. She pressed her face into Sola's hair, and she was still. They held that for a long time. I looked at the chalk flat, the shadows of the 4 ships, parallel, long, pointing west in the white morning light. I gave them the space of it. When they separated, Sola took 1 step back, looked between us, me on one side of the gate, her mother on the other. The way she looked at things, she was categorizing. Then she held the river stone out toward her mother. Sora looked at the stone, looked at me. Something moved in the silver eyes that I didn't have language for. It was not surprise. Something that had already been calculated, already been expected, and was still, despite all that, landing like it weighed something. She gave you the stone, Sora said. Day 1, I said. I need you to understand something. Sora said. Her tone had shifted, still formal, but different underneath. My daughter stopped at 3 way stations before yours. I know this because the freight channel logs everything. At each one she had the stone in her hand. She looked at Sola. At each one she put it back. I looked at Sola. Sola looked back. Calm, sure. The silver eyes entirely still. She was waiting for someone who would read carefully, I said. She was waiting for someone who would read the code file, Sora said, which is what she told me when I finally reached her through the relay and asked her how she knew. A pause. She said the operator reads everything. He reads all the footnotes. Something in me that had been held at careful distance for 26 days, and for 6 years before that, took a very deep breath. I missed it, I said. She found it. She is very thorough. Warmth in it. And underneath the warmth, something that had been frightened for a long time, and was now on the other side of frightened. The relief that becomes something cleaner. As am I, Operator Varn. I have been thorough with you. I have read every document you filed, every annotation, every initial. I know what you did. She paused. And I know what it cost. It didn't cost me anything. You have been alone on this way station for 6 years, Sora said. Not unkindly, just accurately. Precisely. And my daughter latched to you on day 1, and you did not set her down. I looked at the chalk flat. She gave me the stone, I said. I wasn't going to put it down. Sora was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Sola again. Something passed between them. A long reading look, mother to daughter. History in it. Relief. A question. And then an answer to the question. Sola reached over, took my hand. Small hand. Cool. Ice blue. The bones lighter than I would have expected. She held on with a steadiness that was entirely deliberate. Not a child's uncertain grip. A decision. I held it back. Sora watched this. My child has chosen you as her father, she said, quietly, in formal register. But not the tone of an official statement. The tone of something that has already happened, and is simply being named. The way stone setting happens. The stone is placed. And after that it simply is. I looked down at Sola. She was looking up at me with the silver eyes. Patient, sure, 6 years old and entirely certain of the world she was describing. I don't know what that means under Velosovan law, I said. My voice was steady. I was mildly surprised by that. Under our house tradition, Sora said, It means what my daughter decided it means. She gave you the stone on day 1. She has not taken it back. She looked at Sola, then back at me. A child of first house who gives the stone and holds it given has made a claim that her house is bound to honor. A pause. I am her house. Another pause. I am bound to honor it, and I do honor it, freely. Sola's hand tightened on mine, very slightly, just enough to be felt. I stood on the chalk flat in the white morning light, Sola's hand in mine. The navigator sovereign of First House Isora across the gate, the 4 ships behind her, the long shadows pointing west. I thought about the last 6 years, about a life made small enough to lose nothing else from, about a crate that came in 4 minutes late and 9 kilos over, about a child who had waited at 3 stations before she found someone who read the footnotes, and I thought, Kava, you found it faster, but I got there. All right, I said. Same 2 words as the first morning, but different now. Everything different. Sola made a small sound that might have been satisfaction. Vale Isora looked at me across the gate. There are arrangements to discuss, she said. Her tone had fully shifted now. Official business concluded. Something else beginning. House tradition, Federation guardianship instrument, the review board resolution. I have a legal team aboard. A pause. I would also like tea if you have it. I have it, I said. I opened the gate. Vale Isora walked through it. Her 4 officers held position at the ships. Her decision, not theirs. She had made the choice to come into this building without formal escort. Trust given before it was required. The same way I had made breakfast instead of calling the relay. Sola fell into step beside me in the way she had been doing for 26 days. Natural. Automatic. We went inside. I put the kettle on. Vale Isora sat at the table. The same table where Sola and I had worked through the code file and the cartography plates and the challenge filings and the foundational charter argument. She put her hands flat on the table and looked at the room. The way someone looks at a place they have been trying to imagine from a long way away, filling in the gaps between what the documents described and what the place actually was. Small, practical, a relay board on one wall, a document cabinet, a workbench covered in survey plates with small pencil markings in 2 different hands. Sola's cartography cards stacked neatly on the corner shelf, the physical code file on the desk. Open to page 47. Vale Isora looked at the code file, then at me. Page 47, she said. Subclause 9, I said. And footnote 12, Vale Isora said. Sola found it, I said. I'd read the page 3 times. She pointed to the bottom. Vale Isora looked at her daughter. Sola was already at the workbench. She had picked up the current survey plates. The Eastern Corridor audit was apparently not complete. Because of course it wasn't. Because she had work to do. She is very thorough, I said. Vale Isora watched Sola for a moment. Then something at the edges of her expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but the place where one was considering arriving. She gets it from her mother, she said. I brought the tea and sat down across the table and opened the code file between us. Because Vale Isora had a legal team, and I had 26 days of documentation, and we were both as established thorough, so we worked. The legal team came in from the ship at midday, 3 of them. Velosovan, precise and efficient. They spread documents across the table. I spread my own. The code file stayed open between everyone. The 7C filing to be converted to a formal compact guardianship instrument under both House tradition and Federation standards simultaneously. The review board to be notified of voluntary resolution. The Bureau warrant to be withdrawn with Navigator Sovereign's direct consent. Torvin Alsh's warrant, already under suspension pending investigation, to be formally voided. The Vethran commercial asset claim already referred to Assembly-level review, to be cited in the formal resolution as null under Article 3, Section 1. Each item in order, each one methodical, each one crossed off. I initialed everything with the same initials I had put on every run sheet for 22 years and every filing for 26 days. Sola watched from the workbench. She had put down the survey plates. She was sitting very still with the river stone in both hands and the silver eyes moving over every document that crossed the table, cataloging, processing, learning the shape of the thing that had been done for her. Not to her, for her. I noticed this. I thought 6 years old, and she is learning how the law moves, how a provision becomes a precedent, becomes a charter challenge, becomes a guardianship instrument. I thought whoever she becomes, she is going to be formidable. I thought I would very much like to see that. Favre arrived at 3 p.m. I had called her that morning, asked her to come. She came in, looked at the room, assessed the situation in about 4 seconds. Vael Isora, the legal team, the documents on the table, me. Navigator Sovereign, Favre said. Warrant Officer Favre, Vael Isora said. I understand you conducted this process with integrity throughout. Favre held her eyes. I attempted to. You succeeded. A pause. I wish to formally withdraw the Bureau recovery warrant in your presence as the acting officer of record, with appreciation for your professional conduct. Favre stood at the table while Vael Isora signed the withdrawal instrument. Controlled. Precise. The bearing of someone who takes their job seriously and is watching it conclude correctly. Then she looked at me. The law held, she said. You held it with me, I said. Favre extended her hand. I shook it. A pause. Favre glanced toward the workbench where Sola sat. Sola looked at her with the silver eyes. Survey verification, I said. She's corrected 4 systematic errors in the Cathora corridor survey data. Found a miscalibration pattern across 3 corridors. Favre looked at Sola for a moment, then back at me. How old is she? 6. A pause. Good, Favre said. She left. Late afternoon. The legal team had gone back to the ship. Documents filed. Instruments signed. Everything transmitted and time-stamped and logged in every system that mattered. The kettle had been refilled 3 times. I sat at the table. Vael Isora across from me. Between us, the guardianship instrument signed. The river stone which Sola had set in the middle of the table an hour ago and not taken back. I want to ask you something, Vael Isora said. All right. When you filed the custody hold, on day 1, did you know who Sola was? Who her house was? I looked at her. No, I knew she was a child with no manifest and a bureau warrant on her, and I had the code file. Vael Isora nodded, not in surprise, in confirmation. I received notice of the filing from the Compact Records office on day 2, she said. I have been navigating back since day 4. A pause. We are not a close transit from here. 22 days. Another pause. I want to tell you something. When I finally reached Sola through the relay before I arrived, the first thing I asked her was how she knew. How she knew to give you the stone. I waited. She said the operator stands in the light and looks at the crate for a long time before he opens it, and then he opens it anyway, without a witness, because it was right. I looked at the chalk flat through the window. Kiva taught me that, I said. Read the discrepancy before you open the lid, and then open it anyway. Tell me about Kiva, Vael Isora said. So I told her. The corridor runs, the card games, the footnote, the habit, and the pressure failure, and the 6 years on the chalk flat. Vael Isora listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You kept the habit, she said. It was hers, and it was useful. And it brought you here. I looked at the river stone on the table, at Sola at the workbench, head bent over the survey plates again. Back to work. Back to the systematic Eastern Corridor audit that was apparently going to continue regardless of what the adults at the table were discussing. It brought me here, I said. The evening came in slow, the chalk flat going from gold to amber to the gray-white of dusk. The way it moved on Cathora, the way it had moved every evening for 6 years. The answer had always been not yet. Tonight the answer felt different. Not yet meant something else now. Not yet meant there are things to do first. There are survey corrections to file. There are corridor audits to complete. There are more runs coming in on Darrow's truck. More weights to check. More footnotes to read. And there is a child who gave me a stone on day 1 and has not taken it back. Vale Isora stood at the window beside me. They were quiet for a while. The legal business done. The tea finished. Something else in the room now. Something that did not have a document for it. In our house tradition, Vale Isora said, "There is no single word for what you are." She paused. There is a word for parent, a word for guardian, a word for the person a child has chosen, which is older and more specific than either of those. I cannot translate it exactly into Federation standard, but it means roughly the one whose door she came to. I looked at the chalk flat. My door came to her, I said. She was already inside. Yes, Vale Isora said. That is also how it works sometimes. Sola appeared at my side, both hands around the river stone, looking up. Are you done talking? She said. I looked down at her. What do you need? The Eastern Corridor audit has 7 more plates, she said. I need the survey archive access code. I looked at Vale Isora. Vale Isora looked at Sola, with the expression of a mother who has fully accepted that her child is exactly who her child is. I'll get you the code, I said. I went to the board. Behind me I heard Vale Isora say very quietly, 7 more plates. And Sola, the miscalibration started 18 years ago. I want to find the original source. A pause. Of course you do, Vale Isora said. They went outside one last time before the ships left, just the 3 of us. Me, Sola, Vale Isora, the chalk flat in the last light of the day. The sky above the western ridge had gone deep amber, stars coming through at the edges, one at a time. Sola walked between us. She stopped, looked down, crouched and set the river stone on the chalk flat between our 3 sets of feet. One precise movement, a small sound against the pale ground. She looked at it for a moment, then she stood up. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I looked at the stone, the pale vein running through it, catching the last of the amber light. I thought about Kiva, who read footnotes first, who found things before they needed to be found. I thought Kiva. A child found me by a footnote. Your footnote. I thought, I think you would have liked her. I think you would have liked her a great deal. Vale Isora looked at the stone, then at me. I honor what my daughter decided, she said. I have said that, and I mean it fully. A pause. But I want to say also for myself, not as navigator sovereign, not as her house. She held my eyes. Thank you. I looked at the chalk flat, the amber light going, the stars coming through. She sneezed, I said, and I almost smiled. And then I did. Sola looked up at me with the silver eyes, satisfied, certain, 6 years old and entirely clear about the world she had described. I reached down and picked up the stone, held it in my palm, the pale vein catching the starlight now. I put it in my jacket pocket, where it would stay. Kiva read the footnotes first. She taught me the habit on a long run through the outer reach a long time ago. I kept the habit after she died because it was hers and because it was useful, and because keeping the habits of people you've lost is a way of continuing to be in conversation with them. A child found me by a footnote. I had been careful my whole working life. Careful with cargo, careful with weight, careful with everything except once the one thing, and that was 6 years behind me now. I had not known that careful done long enough is also a kind of love. I know that now. She taught me.